Hi, my name is Bailee, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on Arrested Development. So it aired from 2003 to 2019, but I'm going to be focusing more on its airtime in the 2000s. So starting with historical context, the 2000s are known as the decades of distribution. We saw the 9/11 terrorist attacks happen in 2001, which kind of led to a war on terror and invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq. We see technological shifts and the digital age, so the internet is booming. We see the iPod get created, Netflix, YouTube, Facebook, new platforms for content in a different way, and we see the decline of traditional media. There's the Columbia disaster that happens in 2003, in which the U.S. Space Shuttle breaks up as it's returning from a mission. We see a continuation of natural disasters across the world. The Kyoto Protocol happens in 2005, which is an international agreement intended to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. We see an increase of social movements, specifically debates over marriage equality, race relations, and immigration. And a really prominent aspect is the Great Recession, which happens in 2007 due to a mortgage crisis in the U.S. and kind of follows suits around the world. And in 2009, we see our first African-American president, Barack Obama, take office. Next, looking at families in the 2000s. So first, and really important aspect is divorce rates continue to rise, and this led to more blended families due to remarriage, in which two parents with children from previous relationships come together in a union, and a lot of this could be linked to poor economic circumstances. We see increased same-sex unions, so the 2000 census says that children were commonly present in same-sex cohabitions. 33% of women in same-sex partnerships and 22% of men in same-sex partnerships had children living with them. We see financial stability become more polarized, so white people, the educated and the economically secure, have much more stable family situations than minorities, the uneducated, and the poor. We see an increase in multi-generational households, which include two adult generations and extended family members. Delayed marriage becomes more common, also likely due to the Great Recession. We see increased single parents, so 42% of women were giving birth were not married, and cohabitation was more widespread and normalized, probably due to the rise in the internet as well. We see a shift in children's living arrangements due to high divorce rates, so children are much more likely to have parents living elsewhere than in the past. And there's also a term I found called living apart together, a term used to describe couples who are in cohabitation or marriage-like relationships who define themselves as couples but not live in separate households, and these children will be in these separate households a lot of the time. Okay, next, looking at Arrested Development. It's a critically acclaimed sitcom that follows the eccentric Bluth family, a once extremely wealthy family whose fortunes have taken a drastic turn after George, the father, gets arrested for fraud and white-collar crimes. So the series is centered around Michael Bluth, the family's most normal member, and son of George, who is tasked with keeping the unusual family and business afloat and dealing with their somewhat self-destructive behavior. I feel like it's a show more centered around characters than it is driven by plot. The series has been praised for its sharp satire of American culture and its exploration of family dysfunction. It's also kind of a backbone, I feel like, to many comedies that follow suit. One of them coming to mind is The Office, due to its unique narrative techniques. Next, looking at targeted audience. So it was initially aired on Fox from 2003 to 2006, and while it was critically acclaimed and had a following, the following wasn't large enough in its original run, and this led to the cancellation after 3 seasons. This partially, I would imagine, was due to the fact that it was rated TV mature, so there's sexual humor, blurred sex scenes, nudity, language, just very adult themes present within the show. So, it was targeted towards more mature audiences. So according to the Wiki audiences, 70% of the audience was male, so only 30% women, and 65% of the viewers are 18 to 34, so it was a very narrow amount of people who actually watched this show. In 2013, due to Netflix, there was a revival of the show due to the growing fan base. So season 4 did really well, earning 3 Emmy nominations, but season 5 received a lot of backlash, and many people felt like they were just pushing it a bit too far. So next, looking at the family, first we have George Bluth, who's the patriarch of the family. He's, the corrupt businessman who's imprisoned for fraud. But even when he's in prison, he still remains a constant presence in the family's lives. He's able to manipulate events constantly throughout the show behind bars. Next, we have Lucille. So she's the family's matriarch. She's manipulative, materialistic. She's very cold, has a sarcastic and direct sense of humor. And she's very different from mothers we had seen previously because she is not a nurturing figure at all within the show. Next, we have Michael, who I kind of talked about a little bit. He is the most level-headed and responsible member of the family, and he's burdens himself with the responsibility of keeping the family afloat, and despite his efforts, he constantly gets dragged back into the chaos of the family. We have Gob, who I find to be a really funny character, and I think this is a lot of people who watch the show find him to be one of the funniest characters. He's an incompetent magician who is always trying to prove himself, but usually fails to do so. He's the older brother of Michael and often feels undermined by him because much of the power is given to Michael instead of him, even though he's older. Next, we have Lindsay. She's the adopted daughter of George and Lucille. She's a self-absorbed actress who is constantly seeking fame and fortune, but never wants to get a real job. Next, we have Tobias, who is her husband. He's a pretty uncomfortable character, in my opinion. He's known, in my eyes, as being pretty insecure. He lacks a lot of social cues, and has really bizarre behavior and is kind of comedic relief within the show. Next, we have Buster. He's a sheltered, neurotic man-child who relies heavily on his mother and often resorts to childish behavior and is protected fully by her. Next, we have George Michael Bluth, who is Michael's teenage son, who's often caught up in the family's dynamics as well. He's kind of shy and reserved, and he also has a weird relationship with his cousin in which he is kind of secretly in love with her, which is such a weird plot point. But it kind of just shows the weird dynamic of their family. And he's constantly kind of feels overprotected by his father due to his mother's death and kind of wants to live a little more separate from them. And lastly, we have Maybe, who is the daughter of Lindsay and Tobias Funk. And this is the cousin who is in this weird, love relationship with her other cousin, Michael. Okay, next, looking at how family is presented, the first aspect is that, it's a very dysfunctional family. They insult, belittle, lie to each other, they intentionally expose each other, humiliate each other, degrade each other, even sometimes get involved in violence. They attack each other verbally, emotionally, sometimes physically, and, they kind of encourage each other into these cycles of destructive and dangerous behaviors. And kind of going off that, they have a very complex family dynamic. So the show really shows a perfect balance between absurd and being relatable. So all of the characters have a very, very prominent self-interest and manipulation that kind of overshadows genuine care and affection towards each other. And it kind of critiques traditional family values and explores just impacts of wealth, power, and ego on interpersonal relationships. And I feel like this also could be a form or an example of interactionalism and how their meaning within the family is constructed. So a lesser aspect within the show, but still prominent, is that I feel like the show does a good job somewhat of exploring how family is not just about blood connection. Throughout the show, they introduce characters who form really strong bonds with each of the Bluths, even though they aren't related by blood. And some of these examples of characters in the show who do this are J. Walter Weatherman, Kitty Sanchez, Lucille too, and Steve Hoft, and they kind of become reoccurring characters and kind of intertwined in the web. A really important aspect I think that Arrested Development does in showing and portraying family is single fatherhood. So it offers, a kind of unique unique perspective on single fatherhood through the character Michael, who I have talked a lot about. He's portrayed as somewhat reluctant single father tasked with raising his son Michael. And he's dealing with the chaos and dysfunction of his own family while still trying to be a good father to his own son. It highlights the challenges and sacrifices one comes with single parenthood, and the balance of responsibilities between his fatherhood and his career. And the show is very funny, but despite the comedic tone of the show, it sometimes touches on more serious themes, including the importance of parental guidance and the impacts of family dynamics on children's upbringings. There's also topics of adoption. So the daughter Lindsay, who is originally presented as the biological twin sister of Michael, is later revealed that she's adopted, and it just shows that blood relation isn't the only aspect that makes someone a family. She's just as much a sister and a daughter. I feel like though the show is really absurd, it does have a pretty accurate portrayal of family issues. Through money, wealth becomes the main source of their disagreements, and a lack of communication. Each character has flaws, but the show does a good job of showing how individual flaws impact relationships with another. Kind of going off that, there's also the topic of how family affects us into adulthood. So the blues patterns are passed down from generation to generation. So the questionable morals and manipulative behavior are mirrored in the children, and just everyone in the show. It kind of just trickles down, and we see how parents have a lasting impact on the rest of the family. And the last two aspects that I feel like are really prominent is it is an example of a blended family from divorced parents coming together, as well as extended family being really prominent. Each of them, it's a complex web of relationships, and it shows that both biological and non-biological individuals can make up a family, and it's not just blood-based. Okay, so that is all I have for my presentation. I really appreciate you watching it, and I hope you learned something.